This is horrific. We heard Melissa Bell saying that people are standing there on the street in horror.
Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France is burning as I speak.
It has stood on the banks of the River Seine for more than 800 years.
The destruction of this medieval symbol of Paris has left the city under a pall of shock and smoke.
Yeah, I think the horror is added to because it has this otherworldly divine significance for people.
Because we've seen a history of this just in the last few weeks, even in France. Attacks on Catholic and Christian sites.
What about this? From just a few weeks ago. Shock. 10 Catholic churches attacked in France in just 1 week.
French churches have been targeted by vandals in a spate of attacks since the start of the year.
Church after church after church is being set on fire.
The media also reported that the Al-Aqsa Mosque caught fire as well at the same time.
All Zionist ceremonies have esoteric biblical narratives. Sports, movies, orchestrated chaos, blood sacrifices, I don't care what it is.
What is your gut level on this? I mean, you're saying looks like a ritual. They admit they want to build some Illuminati temple like the Louvre on it. But I mean, why would they be so obvious about saying it's not an inside job, it happened all by itself with no evidence?
Fucking France was bombed to shit. Paris was destroyed in the Second World War, and even bombs from the Luftwaffe and tanks from Nazi Germany couldn't set the church on fire.
For people watching the Notre Dame get ravaged by fire on YouTube was kind enough to fact-check the broadcast with facts about 9/11 and terrorism.
Even if nobody died, I mean, it's like a 9/11, it's a French 9/11, you know?
They're calling this the French 9/11, which makes you wonder about who's behind it.
I'm sure it doesn't surprise most in this time that 9/11 was a satanic ritual.
I mean, basically it depicts their new world. This is the destruction of, quote, Christianity as the world knows it.
And whenever Zionists do that type of stuff, you better believe it's definitely agenda-based, predictive programming.
Old Testament, evil Baal kind of stuff.
They're also built on ley lines and powerful spots on Earth's magnetic grid that connect the pyramids to Machu Picchu to Glastonbury and lots of these different cathedrals. So this is a really powerful sacred site.
The fact is here there is some real evil going on and there is something that is about to happen, something very big.
Quite sure yet what's caused this fire. There's some suggestion it could be linked to extensive renovation works that were being carried out here.
So tens of millions of euros have been pledged over the next few years, a mixture of public and private financing. Now, the first phase of this renovation was to restore the spire and the roof, and that had been underway.
The local newspaper Le Parisien is reporting that a fire alarm went off here at Notre Dame Cathedral shortly after 6 p.m. on Monday, but a computer bug showed the fire's location in the wrong place. The paper is also reporting the flames may have started at the bottom of the spire and may have been caused by an electrical problem in an elevator.
French media quoted the Paris Fire Brigade saying the fire might be linked to a multi-million-dollar renovation underway on the spire.
So far, they're pointing the blame at an electricity fault. A lift had been set up on the building site to reach the highest parts of the scaffolding.
I don't think that's the case. My guess would be probably like some electrical equipment that malfunctioned or short-circuited or something like that. That's the only thing I can think of. But
the workers say that no electrical equipment was used on Monday. Debris scattered all over the floor. It's among the piles of charred beams and damaged stones that investigators are attempting to find out just how the blaze broke out inside Notre Dame Cathedral.
And
It is not the only church that has caught fire in France in the last year, or you've seen quite a few desecrations of churches. Again, not saying this is one of them, but give us a sense of the scale of what's been happening.
In March, a 7-day spree saw Catholic churches all over France targeted with anti-Christian vandalism, including one church being defiled with human excrement. At least 10 instances of vandalism were recorded between February and March, including the desecration of altars, defacing of Christ on the cross, and more. A total of 875 churches were torched or vandalized last year in France. 875.
So you've literally had hundreds. This is just taking facts and evidence and trying to solve a mystery. Now, nobody's buying that the fire was just an accident.
It reminds me also of the church burnings of the 90s. There were some 145 churches supposedly burned throughout the 90s and the Clinton era. And of course, Bill Clinton used it as some thing to grandstand and act like he was a great hero. And there's some interesting evidence to suggest that those church burnings were in fact not real.
This is a spiritual war, it appears. I don't know what you guys think. There's some kind of satanic force present. And we can all feel that energy everywhere you look now.
Whether this was an accidental fire or it was purposeful, the feminine energy of this beautiful cathedral is under attack in some regard. Whether you are Christian or Catholic or whatever faith that you're identified with, there's no denying this is a powerful cathedral. It represents a lot of the wisdom that humanity has acquired on how to ascend and access higher levels. It's burning right now, and as it's burning, the steeple, which has fallen, it's like an incense stick, a sacred stick of incense. Think about that. There is the wisdom of Notre Dame is being offered as a sacrifice.
But really at the root of these is something darker, a spiritual darkness. And that's the key here, is to understand that these kind of events do have symbolic significance if you're paying attention.
Here is where it gets really weird and creepy. Daily Star: Islam's third holiest mosque burns on the same night as Notre Dame. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the world for Muslims, was ablaze at the same time as an inferno gripped the Notre Dame Cathedral.
The Palestine news agency said the fire broke out in a guard's room outside the roof of the Marwani prayer room. Video clips posted on social media showed smoke rising from the top of the prayer room. The mosque is located on the top of the Temple Mount and is considered the third holiest site in Islam. It's been at the center of the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict. The cause of the fire is not yet known. The mosque compound is located in the Old City section of East Jerusalem, which Israel seized from Jordan in 1967. Israel annexed the entire city in 1980, but Jordan's monarchy was granted custodial rights over the Islamic holy sites.
The Temple Mount is the site of the first and second Jewish temples, but for hundreds of years it's been occupied by Muslim shrines. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Golden Dome of the Rock now sit on the site. But some Jewish people want to build a third Jewish temple.
Recent violence between Israel and Palestine centers around the site called the Temple Mount, which has a long history of sparking conflict between Israel and the surrounding Muslim countries. So what makes the Temple Mount so important? Well, in a nutshell, this little hill in Jerusalem hosts structures representing each religion. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is considered the third holiest site in Sunni Islam, the Western Wall, which is considered the holiest place for Jews to pray, and for Christians, the Temple Mount is where Jesus issued a challenge against temple authorities, which ostensibly led to his crucifixion. The triple claim on this area is further complicated by the dual control of it by both Muslim and Israeli authorities.
It all started 4,000 years ago, when God told Abraham to go to Mount Moriah and sacrifice his son there. Abraham, believing that God will either provide a substitute or will raise Isaac from the dead, goes to the top of this mountain, and indeed, God provides a substitute, a lamb. 1,000 years later, King David purchases a threshing floor that is located at the very same place, Mount Moriah. And on top of this threshing floor, David's son builds the first temple. This temple was then destroyed by the Babylonians. They burned it down to the ground, but not for a long time. For just 70 years later, God appoints a king over Babylon who permitted the Jews to rebuild the second temple. All this brings us to the times of Jesus. According to Flavius Josephus, the second temple was renovated and massively expanded by King Herod in the 1st century BC. He wanted it so much greater in size that he had architects from Greece, Rome, and Egypt to expand the natural plateau of the Mount Moriah into a giant square platform. Almost immediately after the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were erected. There's archaeological and historical evidence that suggests the dome was added to an existing church from the Byzantine Empire, and the storerooms of the temple were converted to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 300 years later, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem and identified the Al-Aqsa Mosque as nothing else but Solomon's temple. It was from this location that the new order took the name of Templar Knights. But they did not stay here for a long time. In the same century, the Mamluks captured Jerusalem and held post until the Ottomans took over. So since the time the Crusaders were gone until today, the Temple Mount was under Muslim governance, with a strict no excavation policy.
And this is really a basic principle of Jewish faith, that the Holy Temple is not just some magnificent synagogue. It really wasn't a synagogue at all, or just some beautiful building rooted in the biblical past of the Middle East, but rather it's seen by the Torah as the vehicle that brings about a certain spiritual reconciliation between all of mankind and God. And of course, every prophet of Israel tells us that the time will come when the temple will again be rebuilt, and actually it's the era, the epic of the Third Temple, which is seen, for example, when we study Isaiah, as the time which will be unparalleled in human history, when all mankind will be at peace and united in the recognition of God. So everything that we do is really about the restoration of the promise of the temple. There's a number of ways that we go about this: the production of educational materials and curriculum that are used all over the world, and conferences and publications.
But now they're going to equate the Third Temple with Israel's right to exist. And if you deny the Third Temple, then therefore you're also denying Israel's right to exist.
And they define that as Zionism. And we remember back to AIPAC, yes. That's their definition. Yes. Now, this sounds like a political issue, right? That advocating for, again, that this temple needs to be built, or that it's akin to Tel Aviv and other places in Israel.
You know, we try not to be political. We're really not a political organization at all. It's totally a religious and educational undertaking, but it's kind of hard to separate. You know, we're called a kingdom of priests and a holy people, the chosen people. Now, not everyone is comfortable with that appellation. I woke up one morning and there it was. I didn't fill out a form. And it doesn't mean that we're the best pediatricians and Wall Street brokers and film producers. We happen to be that also, but that might be a coincidence. But what it really means is that God has chosen the Jewish people to be the vehicle throughout the saga of human history, wherein he proclaims to the whole world that he exists. And you know what? When you look at a Jew in the world today, there's no other explanation for the fact that we're here except that there's a God in the world. And we're really just trying to do everything possible as a declaration of our faith, that we believe that this is the destiny of the Jewish people.
I mean, right now, Jewish people just going on the Temple Mount can create a riot sometimes. So can you envision a scenario where they would allow the temple to be built? No.
Well, you know, a lot of people will try anything for peace, and John Lennon said, all we're saying is give peace a chance.
But the fact is, these men were part of a conspiracy. Each of them were members of the tightly knit Rex Deus families. They were related by blood or marriage, most often by both. And the publicly stated purpose, you might call it a cover story, of these Knights Templar was that they were there to protect Christian pilgrims from bandits as the pilgrims traveled to Jerusalem. But the truth is that what most of these men spent their time doing, the first 9 years of their time in Jerusalem, was they were excavating the Temple Mount, hunting for the hidden treasures left by their alleged ancestors. And this is confirmed by modern archaeologists who covered an 80-foot deep shaft that led below the ground level of the Temple Mount. And they discovered a network of tunnels that the Templars had dug out. Archaeologists have wondered how these medieval knights knew where to dig. It's not that easy to figure out. Well, the Rex Deus families have presented their own answer to these questions, claiming that for over 1,000 years, the knowledge of what was buried and where it was buried had been passed down by oral tradition. What we do know is that something that these men discovered made them very, very wealthy. Now, here's where the story really begins to get intriguing.
To make this as simple as possible, the Knights Templar stole the secrets of the Solomonic Temple and established the Order of the Knights Templar, which JR became, and there's no doubt about this, a secret order.
Groups like the Templars and the Freemasons practiced archaeoastronomy, or the ancient practice of aligning buildings with celestial bodies. The majority of groups that worship the sun, moon, or stars follow the Kabbalah. Kabbalists are similar to Freemasons. They build mind control programs and are skilled in subliminal messaging and manifestation through subliminal symbols, phrases, or numbers. They use forms of numerology and geometry to construct their mind control spells. Kabbalists are usually trained in a form of astronomy and sometimes in demonology. Who would want to carry out mind control? One category are the groups that use the Kabbalah. This, and this. are all based on the Kabbalah, and no, none of these organizations are separate.
All versions of Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Skull and Bones, the Palladian Rite of Freemasonry, Co-Masonry, Scottish Rite Masonry, the Ku Klux Klan, and Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis are derived from the original Kabbalistic rituals of the Knights Templar.
They learned the secret arts of the Kabbalah, an ancient form of Jewish magic, along with its dark rites and rituals. The Jews had learned the arts from the pagans of ancient Egypt during the times of enslavement to the Pharaoh, and developed them into Babylon.
They followed the rules and the laws of the Babylonian Talmud, which is the most antichrist book in existence.
The Knights Templars likely acquired their secrets of Gnosis, or internal alchemy, and the Kabbalah from several different sources during their nearly 200 years in the Middle East. The stated goal of these sacred and guarded practices is nothing less than to literally evolve the person's consciousness and being into a higher state of existence.
Now, these teachings of the Egyptian mystery schools eventually became part of the mystery schools of ancient Greece and later Israel. Sacred geometry was used in the construction of Israel's first permanent temple, which is known as the Temple of Solomon. Kabbalah teaches that the design of the temple represented the metaphysical world and was an earthly representation of the tree of life through which the Creator reveals His truth. There's plenty of other evidence that the ancient Temple of Solomon incorporated elements of the esoteric mysteries and sacred geometry that were taught by these ancient mystery schools.
Solomon was a biblical magician king who is accredited with inspiring large parts of the corpus of works we now know as the Kabbalah.
In other words, Solomon was one of the most influential alchemists, occultists, and was guided by none other than Lucifer himself. Revelation 13:18 says, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And we see that in 1 Kings 10:14, "Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold." With all of this information, Revelation 13:18, which says the number of the beast is the number of a man, or Solomon, and his number is 666 in gold. Hopefully, my opinion is starting to make sense now.
King Solomon ruled ancient Israel from the year 970 to 928 BC and had extensive knowledge of the Kabbalah, which he used to communicate with demons. The Kabbalah describes the many angels and demons who inhabit the spiritual realm. The Kabbalah gives Kabbalists a roadmap called the Tree of Life, which explains how to invoke and communicate with these powerful spirits. Satanists, occultists, and Freemasons worldwide venerate the memory of King Solomon, who owned a magic ring engraved with a symbol called the Seal of Solomon. This gave him power over the invisible monarchy of demons. This Seal of Solomon is better known as the Star of David.
The Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, tells us that King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem based on plans given by God to his father, King David, as a permanent resting place for the Ark of the Covenant, the chest used to carry the 2 tablets of stone on which the 10 Commandments were written and said to have been received by Moses on Mount Sinai.
We have here the beginning of a legend, and the legend is that in the 2 pillars there is hidden esoteric knowledge, the keys to building, if you will, the kingdom on earth.
And as we have seen in previous episodes, these pillars may have been magically represented by the Twin Towers of 9/11. Minoru Yamasaki designed the World Trade Center complex to aesthetically mirror the Islamic temple at Mecca, where the black stone of the Kaaba is placed. Many historians believe that the Kaaba itself is a pagan representation of the planet Saturn.
2 tallest towers standing side by side in a north-south alignment, by the way, just as the ancient Yakin and Boaz used to stand. And the World Trade Center was the very symbol of esoteric wisdom, of world trade, let's just say it, of religious and commercial Babylon.
The mysterious and magical motif of the two pillars have many names and many historical origins.
We Freemasons tie our allegorical origins and the foundations of our symbolic learning system to the building of King Solomon's temple about 3,000 years ago. The 3 degrees of the symbolic lodge are inextricably connected to not only the process of building King Solomon's temple, but also the metaphorical implications of what that historical structure represents.
If the legend is correct, the original Knights Templar who excavated the Temple Mount discovered ancient texts containing mysteries of sacred geometry, among other discoveries.
The Kabbalistic higher secrets of ritual sodomy, the evil eye, chanting incantations, necromancy, blood sacrifice, and invoking the fallen angels in service to Lucifer fascinated the French Knights Templar. Many confessions told of the Knights Templar monks ritually sodomizing each other, invoking evil spirits, and implanting these spirits into animals such as cats. A satanic tradition which is still practiced to this day at lodges of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was once headed by Aleister Crowley.
Regardless, the story of building this first temple by King Solomon is the origin from which almost all our Masonic rituals and symbolism can be traced.
The Knights Templar were also heavily involved in massive building projects throughout Europe. This is the period in which beautiful churches and castles and Gothic cathedrals were springing up all around the continent. And it was during this era that medieval craft mason guilds were formed, those that were building these structures. These guilds formed brotherhoods and shared certain moral traditions within their groups. They shared secrets. One of the craft mason guilds was known as the Children of Solomon, and the Templars formed a special relationship with the group. And soon, the two would combine, and from their union, a new secret mystery school would be born, one which we know today as the Freemasons.
They first renamed themselves the Sovereign Knights of Malta, and then, after establishing trade routes to North America long before Christopher Columbus, they re-emerged in Scotland, calling themselves Freemasons.
So you see, we Freemasons think of King Solomon's temple as a metaphor for building better lives, better relationships, and a better world.
Get ready. Yes, the pet go. Fingers on the first word of the story. Get ready to read the story the fast way. Get ready.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your view, your awakening.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. But basically, the film came to me in a place of suffering. So it was all the things that I had lived personally, and the materialism that I had experienced in different realms in my life that I had also contributed to. So not just put on me, but also, I had gotten involved in it as well. So it was about that place of suffering. And it just felt like this film for me was a sort of lifeline, a way for me to go into my own fears. And I think that that's what I've seen in people, is it brings up a lot of stuff. It just kind of stops the mental programming, and then just kind of goes right viscerally, and people have a hard time with it. And I can understand, because I went through the same questioning. I had those fears. I saw this. I kept seeing the Christ figure on his boat, and I was like, and that was what was coming up for me. It felt like I had to do this film. So that's what it was for me. This was a real journey. Say a spiritual journey for me. It was wonderful.
Muslim American Society calls it an oversight, that type of a response makes it even more infuriating. It indicates that maybe they aren't outraged at the fact that they are radicalizing, indoctrinating their own children. It's that maybe they're upset that they exposed themselves by posting a video to their own Facebook account. So I'm very bothered by it. And I also know about the connections and the founding of the Muslim American Society as it relates to the Muslim Brotherhood. Muhammad Akif, who is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, is one of the founders of the Muslim American Society. So they say this is unintended. They had children talking about chopping off of heads and martyrs and liberating Al-Aqsa Mosque. The message isn't one that you play and have these kids talk about with, unintended. That's that's unacceptable and obviously unbelievable.
These are just some of the things that have happened during this dark time.
What am I getting to? Well, what I'm getting to is that these acts of murder and barbarity and bloodshed that have been committed, all occurring within a day or two of this particular event, and the fact that they all were very bloody carnages, makes me believe that the actions themselves were not necessarily just randomly placed where they're at. That they may have been orchestrated to occur on the particular days that they did.
Now, it's when a very important occult festival related to the worship of Baal begins. April 19th is the first day of a 13-day period of time known as the blood sacrifice to the beast.
And according to the occultist calendar, a fire sacrifice is required on April 19th. And in fact, the latter half of April is identified as being significant for occultists.
April 19th is also known as the Feast of Moloch. Now that's where they worship that owl, and they did human sacrifices, and that's what they do at the Bohemian Grove.
It has been said that April 20th is associated with the god Baal, the ancient pagan god Baal of the Canaanites, who also is in turn associated with Moloch. And of course, Moloch is also associated with money, but also Moloch is associated with fire. Both Baal and Moloch are associated with fire and with sacrifice.
Child sacrifices are a key feature of the worship of Moloch and also of Baal.
So what is it that I'm saying? Well, I'm saying that we do not have the official story on any of these things. All we have is a tissue of lies.
Too many lies.
But
Eddie, they're not the same
people. And misrepresentation, and we do not have the truth regarding what really happened in all of these cases. They use these events for multiple purposes. To understand the reality of the occult forces behind the scenes here, it's very real, it's very true, and it's very fucking evil.
We begin with breaking news out of Colorado, where the woman accused of threatening schools is now dead. Investigators believe 18-year-old Sol Pais purchased a shotgun and ammunition in Colorado after arriving from Miami. Police say she was fascinated with the massacre at Columbine High School that happened nearly 20 years ago. The case sparked a massive manhunt and forced at least 18 districts in Colorado to close their schools. More than 500,000 students were told to stay home.
All of this stemming from the search for an armed woman described as infatuated with the Columbine school massacre, 18-year-old Sol Pais.
The suspect's family is asking her to turn herself in. Our CBS station in Miami talked with her father through a closed door of the family home in Surfside.
What do you think about all these things they're saying?
It's like a bad dream. We don't know, we don't have any idea.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what you guys are going through. What did police say about what she's saying?
I think it's that maybe she has a mental problem.
The FBI field office here in Denver has tweeted within the last few minutes an update saying in all caps that there is no longer a threat to the community.
They are citing the Clear Creek County Sheriff saying that the person of interest here, Sol Pais, has in fact been killed.
So this woman that they have been looking for, this 18-year-old Sol Pais, has died. She's deceased.
They found her in an area about 60 miles west of Denver in a forested area. There is a report that somebody saw a woman running in the forest with a gun. That's what may have tipped them off. We don't know how she died. One of the affiliate reporters there on the scene said he heard no gunshots.
Earlier, what they had said that there was a credible threat in the form of 18-year-old Sol Pais from Miami, Florida, who again, they say the Miami field office had warned them on Monday evening that there was somebody who was traveling here to Colorado that they might need to know about.
We know almost nothing. Her blogs really celebrate violence and death, that we do know. And we were told by authorities that she was infatuated with Columbine. That was, I believe, the trigger for them to say, wow, we're going to take this really seriously.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of questions we have as far as the circumstances surrounding this death. Now, we know that law enforcement considered her armed and dangerous, so there were a number of law enforcement officers from the federal, state, local level that were fanned out across the area. As Scott mentioned, there was something that led them to this location.
She hadn't broken any law yet, and depending upon whether or not they find something on the internet, something she said that could be considered an explicit threat, law enforcement would have had to hold her in what we call a brief investigative detention and try to determine how serious she was about some of the things that she said online.
Did anyone tip off police there in Colorado that this woman who's obsessed with Columbine is headed your way?
The FBI would only say they got the tip from their office in Miami. She flew to Denver, bought a pump-action shotgun and ammo. She was 18 years old. She did nothing illegal by doing this. She was able to do this under Colorado law.
Then things started to change. More information was coming in from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, from the Jefferson County Schools, and then from the FBI. When the FBI put up her photo and explained this as a credible threat and the recommendation that the schools in the entire area go on lockout, that was significant.
We dealt with this challenge here just this week, a couple years ago for the Boston Marathon. When you have a threat like that, can you close down a city? Can you close the schools? And I would suspect that what led to the closing of the schools and the lockdowns was that the information was sort of specific enough, even though it may not have been criminal, to kind of spook law enforcement. And I think they made the right gesture in this case.
And then lastly, law enforcement officers learn from each of these incidents, so they know what to be on the lookout for as they come across people, as they come across potential threats, and you can align some of these different signals and patterns in order to stop future threats. So this is going to be a very multifaceted investigation that doesn't end with her death.
Following up on some leads this morning, and as we were interviewing the sheriff for this story, an FBI agent ran over and said, quote, "We've got her." I would say 20 or 30 armed officers were here. We saw SWAT teams with long guns that were heading into the woods as part of this search, following up on what they considered credible leads. We spoke to a woman that was up here hiking with a group of hikers from Denver, and she says that she was told to leave the area by some law enforcement officials because, quote, "a naked woman matching the description with a gun was spotted in the area running through the woods."
Today, Democratic Governor Jared Polis made good on a campaign promise, signing Democrats' red flag gun control legislation. It will allow a judge to declare somebody a danger and order their guns seized.
This law will not prevent every shooting, but it can be used in a targeted way to make sure that those who are suffering from a mental health crisis are able to temporarily have a court order in place that helps make sure that they don't harm themselves or others.
The church I like to visit in Paris, especially on Sunday mornings, is Saint-Sulpice, to enjoy its magnificent pipe organ.
St. Sulpice, the second largest church in Paris after Notre Dame Cathedral, had the large wooden door on its southern transept set ablaze. And then they found out, the day later, investigators confirmed that the fire was started deliberately.
The steeple. There's none other than the seal of Saturn right in your face.
Alright, we'll use the Masonic compass because everybody's familiar with this. We'll go over this again. Alright, this is your Masonic compass that they show everywhere. It's not secret at all, right? And out of this compass, you get your square, your circle, and your triangle, right? Okay, now those three shapes make up a hexagon or a cube. It's all inside this cube that's on the north pole of the planet Saturn, which is what they worship. The cube is in everything.
You gotta always look at things with knowing that they have a deeper meaning. Like I spend every day studying this stuff. Satan is just Saturn in the Bible. And we talking about the Vatican and all of them. They worship Satan.
We're very clear that the deep state believes in symbolism, that they worship Satan, and that Satan or Saturn can be broken up into different symbols that have power, and that they would use these symbols by manipulating them slightly and putting them in plain sight all around us.
Throughout the Middle Ages, the Seal of Solomon has been used by Arab magicians, Kabbalist magicians, Druid witches, and Satanists.
This hexagram and the cube can be found in many strange places and in many strange rituals.
In the multiple spiritual texts, he has been referred to as Moloch, Baal, Beelzebub, but at the end of the day, the deep state views Saturn as Satan.
Saturn is the secret god of the occult world and has been for thousands of years. Multiple cultures began sacrificing humans to this god. Incas, Mayans, Romans, not one of them is still here today.
And so you find this symbol over and over in the ancient world. This is a common recurring theme of Saturn.
And this is what it's all about, IXXI. IXXI is 9/11 in Roman numerals. And look what is in the center of IXXI. It's a hexagon, which is a three-dimensional cube. So just to put it very simply, this is exactly what we're looking at. This is all about this 9/11 IXXI, the generative principle, as above so below, at the expense of thousands of people as blood sacrifice of the innocent, and then rebuilds into like the rise of the phoenix, like the new age of Lucifer.
Saturn is an important key to understanding the long heritage this conspiracy has back to antiquity. The city of Rome was originally known as the Saturnia, or City of Saturn. The Roman Catholic Church retains much of Saturn worship in its ritual. Saturn also relates to Lucifer. In various occult dictionaries, Saturn is associated with evil. And therefore, again, we keep coming back to this, all these different areas of society are in the end focused on one thing. Satanism is Saturnism. Saturn, Kronos, Satan, Black Sun, Dark Lord, they're all the same thing.
And I want you to look at this in a greater context of things. We have had a Zionist-controlled Hollywood, a Zionist-controlled news media that is the conduit to all of this violence, this imagery into every home in America. And so you wonder why there's a culture of violence? It's because it comes from the Jews in Hollywood. That's where the conduit of violence comes from. That's the source of it. But look behind that even deeper. I want to remind you of the Norway shooting of Mr. Breivik, which followed a week after Norway had agreed to support Palestine. And now here we go. Here's a revenge killing in the U.S. sponsored by Israel that was that killed all these innocent children. And that is something that Israelis do very, very well. They target the innocent, they target children, they target women, and they avoid the issue because they're angry, they didn't get their way. So let's connect the dots here about what's going on globally, geopolitically, with Israel involved. Now, they're also calling for a congressional hearing. Now, one thing you can count on with a congressional hearing is there's going to be a cover-up, because all of our congressmen are bought and paid for by the Israel lobby in the U.S. So any truth of this that's going to be is going to be hidden because Israel wants it hidden because they are once again the guilty party. You have to realize Israel has been operating death squads in the United States now since Gabby Giffords and Judge Roll were shot in Tucson. There's been other incidences, the Aurora, Colorado shooting. That was, again, Israeli death squads operating in the U.S. And let's look at our gun control who want to take the guns away. Feinstein, Schumer, Boxer, those are all the ones. Those are all Jewish senators, all Jewish people who want to take guns away from normal, law-abiding, middle-class Americans who have a right under this Constitution to do it. They've been trying to destroy this country and trying to destroy this Constitution for the last 70 years since the Frankfurt School came over here from Germany. And I, for one, it's time to push back. We're not going to sit back and take this Zionist-occupied government that we have in this country anymore. I don't know. I am so disgusted with Israel and their behavior on the international stage. Hollywood is Jewish-owned and Jewish-controlled, and they spew filth and they spew violence out.
Now, I know a lot of folks who hear this ain't gonna like what I'm saying. I really don't give a damn. My job is to tell you the truth, like it or not. If you don't like it, do what you feel you gotta do, but I'm gonna tell it. But when I stand before the Creator, I'm gonna hold my head up high and say, I open the eyes of the blind by telling them the truth that they didn't want told.